The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Hello and welcome to Squawk Box Europe. We're live from Davos. I'm Karen Cho with Steve Sedgwick. We're also joined by Juliana Tattelbaum in London. These are your headlines. An international wave of relief as President Trump rules out using military force in Greenland. Speaking to CNBC's Joe Kernen, he also steps back from imposing further tariffs on Europe.
The tariffs are off. Nothing happens on February 1st.
No, we took that off because it looks like we have pretty much a concept of a deal.
Trump's tariff reversal sends US stocks higher as the S&P 500 notches its best day since November, and futures point to a rebound at the European Open.
President Trump preparing for a Board of Peace signing ceremony in Davos as a number of countries turned down his invitations. The Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof telling CNBC his country won't be joining.
We have too many questions because this is different than, as you said, the UN resolution, also different than the original board plan in the Gaza peace deal.
And speculation swirling over a US-Ukraine bilateral conversation after the President, Mr. Trump, references a meeting with Zelenskyy in Davos. The Polish President Karol Nawrocki issues a fresh warning about Russia.
Regardless of whether a peace deal is signed or not, despite the best efforts of President Trump, Russia will remain a threat to Europe. If peace is signed, Russia will try to regroup its forces and attack Europe in years to come.
No doubt it's been a monumental 24 hours, and right here in Davos, almost the centre of the universe. Yesterday, we saw that 90-minute speech by President Trump calling out what he wanted from Greenland. And the language was so interesting about needing to own Greenland for security, that a leasehold wouldn't do it. And then later in the day, of course, we had this climb down, a real reversal and a framework agreement. The tariffs taken off the table. Europeans that were talking to us early in the day had hoped there would be a reversal, and finally just that wave of relief. So it was just such a significant day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I think we'll probably just go into what he actually said, because I think the interview with Joe Kernen was absolutely fantastic as well, and very interesting listening to Mark Rutte on Fox News as well, where he said the sovereignty issue over Greenland was not mentioned in their conversation. But an interesting day. Yeah.
To the latest now, US President Donald Trump announced that a framework for Greenland has been reached following discussions with NATO Secretary Mark Rutte. Trump told reporters that while more details will be forthcoming, the agreement is, quote, the ultimate long-term deal pertaining to security and minerals. Following Trump's comments, NATO said that Rutte did not propose any compromise to Greenland's sovereignty. Posting on Truth Social yesterday, Trump added that as a result of the framework, he would not impose an additional 10% tariff on the 8 European nations he had targeted over the weekend. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stressed the need for Arctic security, hailing a very good discussion with the US leader.
When it comes to the Arctic, President Trump in his first term already said we should spend more time and more energy on the Arctic and to defend the Arctic against the Russians and the Chinese, because the sea lanes are opening up. Greenland, yes. Not only Greenland, it is the whole Arctic. 7 nations in NATO, 1 outside NATO, Russia, and these 7 have to defend themselves against Russia and China. And what we discussed yesterday, it was a very good discussion, is how can we do that? 1, how can collectively the NATO allies help here, the 7 in the High North, and also others to support that. But the 7 in the High North, including the United States, because also the United States is an Arctic country because of Alaska. And of course Canada, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway. How can we make sure that these countries collectively make sure that the Arctic stays safe, that the Russians and the Chinese stay out? And then when it comes to, so that's one work stream coming out of yesterday, and the other is to make sure when it comes to Greenland, particularly that we ensure that the Chinese and the Russians will not gain access to the Greenland economy, to militarily to Greenland.
There's no doubt we've been watching a very big market reaction. Markets that had taken fright early in the week, bouncing back aggressively yesterday. The US boards certainly climbing, as you can see, 1.2 up for the Dow, more than 1% in the green for the S&P and the Nasdaq. The components shifting, the cyclicals, it was Caterpillar for the Dow and some of those big tech names, the likes of Nvidia for the S&P 500. So we're still very close to record highs, don't forget, on the back of that sell-off. But it was the classic taco trade that investors got behind yesterday. And let's push on and talk about what happened yesterday. Speaking to CNBC yesterday, Trump effectively suggested that the framework involves mineral rights for the United States, as well as steps towards creating the administration's prized Golden Dome defense system.
We have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland, and it has to do with the security, great security, strong security, and other things.
The market, 600 points, getting back a lot of some of the nervousness we had in the last couple of days. The tariffs are off. Nothing happens on February 1st.
No, we took that off because it looks like we have pretty much a concept of a deal.
A deal of ownership, a deal...
Well, it's a little bit complex, but we'll explain it down the line. But the Secretary General of NATO and I and some other people were talking, and it's the kind of a deal that I wanted to be able to make.
Where does Denmark, did they weigh in on what they want, what they would agree to?
Well, I assume they did because he very much represents, he's a strong leader. Mark, you know Mark Rutte. And he, I assume he's been speaking to them. He's been speaking to all of them.
Are mineral rights involved? Is ownership involved? Did the Golden Dome sway people?
I don't want to say yet, but...
The Golden Dome was very compelling today when you talked about that.
Yeah, the Golden Dome, and they're going to be involved in the Golden Dome. And they're going to be involved in mineral rights, and so are we.
It's not specific enough to know at this point how long this lasts, whether it's...
Forever.
Forever.
It'll be forever.
For Greenland at this point.
Yeah. Forever.
That's staggering.
That's better than a 99-year-old.
This is what, 2 hours after.
It's better than the Obama deal with the famous Iran nuclear deal with a 9-year deal. No, this is forever. This is a long term.
I mentioned that you could have come over here and just talked about what you wanted to. Before you left, I think you wanted to talk about where the progress that you've made in terms domestically with the economy and everything else in the United States. And you didn't have to talk, I didn't think you had to talk about Greenland, but you're always moving on to the next thing.
In the speech I gave, I talked a lot about Greenland because we need it for security, and now we're going to have even better security, I think, than I would have had before.
And I know how you operate. I know that you didn't take force off of the table, but all along, I think if there was going to be a war, it was going to be a trade war. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah. I don't see us fighting with Denmark,
NATO.
Fighting with
you've done so much to try to strengthen NATO. I'm sure you don't want to see the dissolution of something you worked.
I'm proud of NATO from the standpoint. Look, I brought them up from 2% to 5% of GDP. They're paying a lot of money. They pay us a lot of money because they buy missiles and they buy a lot of things. Unfortunately, Obama gave them $350 billion for Ukraine, which was just terrible. I mean, the whole thing was terrible. It should have never happened. That's a war that should have never happened. But they paid a lot of money, and I don't know if you know, but I signed a rare earth deal with Ukraine to probably get most of that back, maybe more back than we haven't. But what they did, they were just giving out money like cookies to a child.
Let's call it how it is. The president should be very proud of forcing other nations to spend more money on NATO. That is an absolute achievement, which I think many of us would not disagree with. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, though, has welcomed the breakthrough in Davos, saying the Danish government is open to discussions on everything political. Frederiksen also said she'd been informed that the country's sovereignty had not been negotiated on. That's good to hear, isn't it? And that she wanted to engage constructively with allies on strengthening security in the Arctic, including America's proposed Golden Dome. Well, leaders here in Davos have been giving their take on Greenland all week. Poland's president told us why he thinks President Trump wants Greenland and called for greater diplomacy.
Oczywiście wierzę, że ta sprawa zostanie rozstrzygnięta w ramach rodziny państw, które mają przywiązanie do tych samych.
I believe this issue will be settled within the so-called family of countries sharing the same values. That's how we view the US, as well as our partner Denmark. I deeply believe this issue will be dealt with between the US, Denmark and Greenland. The topic of Greenland has been around since at least the 19th century. We're both historians, right? We both know the matter of ownership of Greenland goes that far back. Today we see it as a strategic point of friction between the US, Russia and China. So from this perspective, the country that bears the greatest responsibility for the security of Europe and the wider world, meaning the United States, is entitled to declare or share some of its responsibilities with regards to Greenland. This problem has to be solved diplomatically rather than through any unnecessary moves, like we've seen from some European nations, which only serve to stoke tensions.
But do you stand with the European nations who are being targeted by the United States because they landed a very small number of troops in Greenland? Do you stand with them and say, no, this is wrong, Mr. President?
Oczywiście Polska nie wysłała swoich żołnierzy do Grenlandii, wiedząc, że powinno to być rozstrzygnięte.
Of course, Poland didn't send its troops to Greenland. It was believed that this should be settled through diplomacy, rather than adding a further complicating factor to the issue of Greenland, at a time when we should be discussing peace in Ukraine and the real issues of the Russian Federation's sheer gangsterism in Ukraine. Deploying troops to Greenland solved nothing and only caused further problems within the NATO family. Speaking to colleagues from neighbouring countries and to EU leaders, I appeal to them that escalation should not be our goal, but rather discussions over how to safeguard Greenland's strategic interests and therefore achieving the expectations of the world's guarantor of peace and the largest NATO donor, the American president, as well as upholding the values we share, namely freedom, independence and democracy. This is feasible if we don't add fuel to the fire.
The European Parliament suspended the approval of a trade deal agreed with the US in July in protest against Trump's demands to take Greenland. The deal, which set US tariffs on most European goods at 15%, was agreed after months of negotiations. The suspension was announced as Trump addressed Davos. Well, Christian Klein joins us, the CEO of SAP. Christian, what 24 hours? We're just reflecting on what's transpired. Every single adjective U-turn was used yesterday: climb down, pivot. I mean, it just went on. How do you plan for business in that type of environment?
Yeah, I mean, predictability is really difficult in these days. But you see how things are changing overnight. I mean, when I talk to my customers here, and to 90% of the people I see here, they're all my customers, they really ask us, hey, how can I gain predictability in my demand forecast? How can I gain more resiliency cross-border? How can you also help us to cope with all the regulatory requirements coming up? And I guess this is what we can do with our tech, yeah, to help our customers to give the resiliency and the predictability in times like that.
You could really go glass half empty or glass half full yesterday on the back of what we learned. We had a classic taco trade, effectively where the president took everything to the maximum level, then turned around in the opposite direction. So we learned something about that negotiation, but we also learned that he's willing to use tariffs for just about every issue. So for business, does it mean you need more diversification? Do you just ignore the noise from the White House? How do you think about that?
I mean, for us in SAP, I mean, we are running businesses in over 120 countries, and our customers want to do global business. So for us, it's really key to find solutions in a world like that. So for us, diversification is key. And, you know, you always need to see, I mean, AI is a big topic, obviously, here, but how can AI also help? Yeah, to drive this resiliency, to drive the predictability. And this is what businesses need, because no one can scale back. I mean, everyone has growth plans. Look at Southeast Asia, look at APJ. These are huge growth markets for many companies here in the West. And this is, you know, what we should focus on.
Christian, it's really interesting. And one of the mitigating strategies I've been asking all CEOs for a long time, but especially here in Davos, is about regionalisation. And that's what everyone's come up with. We're operating pretty much a fragmented model now, where we have R&D and facilities and people within that country to mitigate the concerns over tariff. Does that rip up the globalised company model that so many of you had as your textbook for so many years?
I feel it, especially sometimes bad for the startups here in Europe, because what we are missing is a digital union, and everyone knows that, because it's so hard to scale. And in a world, you know, where AI is moving so fast, you need speed, and you need a digital union to gain that speed. In the rest of the world, for us, it's super important. When we talked yesterday to the Prime Minister of Singapore, I talked to other political leaders. I mean, they are all looking for certain sovereign clouds now, and we need to find technical solutions with our partners to adhere to that. And the big tech, they can do that. But especially here in Europe, I guess it's super important now to really form this digital superpower we all are talking about since years.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of ground in that answer, and that is absolutely fascinating. So I'm taking what you're saying from it is the big transnational corporations such as yourself, using an old phrase, the old TNCs, you can cope with it because you can have mitigation strategies in every country. The smaller companies are really going to struggle, especially in Europe, unless we work a lot harder to give them protection while they're at that very embryonic state.
Exactly. I mean, we talked yesterday about Europeans' competitiveness and how can technology, how can SAP help with that? And I had a collection of political leaders, of business leaders. And I said, look, at the end, we all know the root causes. We talked about them for years. I mean, the business leaders need to take risk because at the end, AI will change their business model once again. It will change how they serve the consumers. It will change how the employees will work. It will change the future of work. And you have to take that risk and you need to drive that change because AI is here to drive adoption. Now, the second thing is, of course, the political leaders. They all know we have way too much regulatory here. We all need this union. We need better access to capital here because we have so many great talents here in Europe, but they are all leaving at a certain point because they don't find, here the market to scale their business. And this is what it is about now. Now it's about leadership and take action.
I was talking to one investor last night. She was saying to me, look, don't confuse having access to policymakers with having any impact. That just because you have the discussion, it doesn't mean any of these projects carry through to fruition. How do we sort of stop that narrative? And we can't just rely on one or two investors trying to drive through projects to achieve scale.
Yeah, look, I mean, I learned that lesson as well. But look at Europe. Yeah? I mean, there's Germany, there's France, there's Poland, there's Italy, there's Spain. I mean, these leaders, they need to come together and say, hey, now let's act in the spirit of one Europe. So at some point, you also need to give up regulatory power to the benefit of having one regulatory framework, having one digital union. And on the business side, once again, it's also on us on the business side to say, hey, how can we build those bridges? How can we enable one global infrastructure in Europe? That is also key.
Christian, you're arguably the most important tech CEO we have in Europe as well, so you're very precious. To all of us in Europe. So I want your kind of top-down view on what you're seeing in AI investment at the moment, because you've seen the cycle in cloud as well. You've created yourself an extraordinary position in that as well. Yeah. Are you concerned about the investment and the revenue expectations and the profit expectations we're seeing from this current cycle of spending in the latest tech fad, which is, of course, AI, and what it's going to do in terms of valuations and perhaps money lost for a lot of investors if indeed it doesn't come to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, Steve, I'm not concerned about the expectations. I mean, AI is real. What I'm now seeing in 2026, which is key for every enterprise, we need to remove the roadblockers for the adoption of AI. I see many enterprises still struggling to adopt AI. Why is that? I mean, there are technical roadblockers, data silos, system silos. At the end, companies run end-to-end, they run business processes, and we need to remove those silos. The second piece is also, we are really going into the customers and say, hey, I have no idea how AI will change my business model. Can you show me industry best practices? Exactly. How can I drive the change? How do I get the employees on board? So let's also not forget, AI is not only a technology you are adapting, it's also about a huge change how you run your company. And these are the two focus areas for SAP.
Are you the problem, though, in the sense that vendor lock-in fees makes it high cost of entry for a lot of companies? Doesn't that make it difficult in an AI era where you want more adoption?
Karen, I not often disagree with you, but here I have to disagree. Because look, I mean, what we are doing is actually, I mean, LLMs, they're becoming stronger and stronger. But we give choice because there is not this one LLM. This is, becoming commodity. And then the data is key. But we are opening up our platform. So we are saying, hey, no matter if it's SAP or non-SAP data, we need to democratize data. So that is super, super important because not one tech company can solve the problem of adoption of AI. And so it's all about working together also in the tech space to really, sort out the challenges of our customers. And I see 2026 is a crucial year for that. And I see really great progress when I see the adoption of our AI compared to 1 year ago. I mean, it really significantly increased. And this is, the way also the enterprises now say, hey, we invested into AI, let's make it real.
Fantastic. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. I know you're an incredibly busy man, so it's lovely to see you here.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Christian Klein, of course, the CEO of SAP. Well, perhaps it was a good day for Denmark yesterday, good day for Greenland, who knows, good day for peace within NATO as well. Wasn't a great day for wind if you listen to what the President had to say. So why don't we ask the most important man in wind in Europe, that's Henrik Andersen, CEO of Vestas, what he thought of the speech yesterday.
I'm Steve Sedgwick from CNBC, and in my new podcast, Executive Decisions, I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything.
I'm not frightened of making tough decisions, and I think leadership can be very lonely.
Business leaders should not stay quiet in a world which is super complex.
It is absolutely fine to also change your mind.
Tough calls, personal crossroads. These are the stories that we can all learn from. It's Executive Decisions from CNBC. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Right, it was quite a speech, an hour and a half long, and as Karen's been pointing out, it was broadly reassuring for within NATO, within the liberal democracy, coherence and accord. But the President used his special address here in Davos to take aim at the renewable energy sector, saying his administration is committed to blocking wind farms and attacking European countries for their use of wind energy.
There are windmills all over Europe. There are windmills all over the place, and they are losers. One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing. China makes almost all of the windmills, and yet I haven't been able to find any wind farms in China. They make a fortune selling the windmills, though, and I think really that's one that they wouldn't be surprised if it stopped. They are shocked that it continues to go. They're very friendly with me. They're shocked that people continue to buy those damn things. They killed the birds. They ruin your landscapes. Other than that, I think they're fabulous, by the way. Stupid people buy them.
Well, China's foreign ministry is back at Trump, saying, look, we stand committed and ready to work with other parties to promote global green and low-carbon transition. So we've had the case for the prosecution. I'm delighted to say the chief defence witness has joined us now. That is Henrik Andersen, who is a great friend and also the CEO of Vestas. Henrik, nice to see you. This is the easiest interview of all time. Do you refute what the president had to say?
No, probably that will be fair. I'm not on that camp, and I will never come in that camp. And I think here it's as always being a regular in Davos and having had this job for now quite a number of years and been on the board for Vestas. The technology works better than described. The facts of also contributing to energy and electricity works better than described in that. And I think by repeating that it doesn't work, doesn't make that fact more true. So I think we continue exactly on the path that we have been. And here it is. You had Christian in here from SAP just prior, and I think anything we touches in our lives today, whether we sit on our phones or laptops or we take transport or whatever, we touches the technology and also the AI development. And there's one underlying fundamental. That will only work if it has almost unlimited capacity of power.
Do you want to address the line about China as well? I've already reiterated what the Chinese foreign ministry said. They're working with all their partners on green energy transition as well. He said the Chinese are for want of a better word, having a laugh. They're selling products that don't work and are not used in China to gullible European customers. My words, but I think I've paraphrased the president fairly accurately.
Yeah, no, come on. I mean, we build a global supply chain. We love working with countries around. We have localized many of the things. And the truth of it is we have factories that produces in most major markets turbines for that market based on local components. If we look at how we source either in the US from US partners, or we source in Europe from European partners, and even in Denmark from Danish partners. We are both global and a national sourcer of components to turbines. And everything produced in China just exported to the rest of the world is not, again, a fact of life. So therefore, I think technology works. The ones who have it, and I speak on behalf of my customers, which I met many of here, seems to be quite happy with it. And therefore, I think it's also planning of one of the big things in Europe and the rest of the world is actually what also China talks about, the scalability of having access to more power, and therefore capacity is important.
That said, from China to the United States, there is a reliance on fossil fuels. And in that speech yesterday from the president, he was painting a picture of the economic strength that the United States has seen with the reliance on old forms of energy versus Europe, which he was talking about in the context of its lack of competitiveness, possibly down to the energy situation. Are you worried that it changes the optics, that there's a push for the population to see more old sources of energy used, whether it's the North Sea or other sources like that?
But I think here we now, and this is where I and you know me well enough now, I really want to sort of encourage everyone to avoid having the pendulum swinging far in one direction, because we are building an energy system that deserves an enormous more capacity. So if the investment is going to be triggered, whether it's in fossil or whether it's in renewable, we need more investments of all. And if that's not triggered because people get nervous for that the pendulum swings in either direction in 3 or 4 years' time, we should remember we are building something that has a lifetime of 30, 50 years. And if that all the time changes in these 3-4 year cycles, then we are actually in trouble, because then we don't get the capacity, and we don't get the energy prices stable. So you know me well enough. I'm not a renewable only, because then societies will stop. But either or, the underlying fundamental is we need more available of the same. And can I just remind you, in the European today, the latest statistics of 25 came out, and there's actually a balance between renewable and fossil fuel for the first time in 2025.
The response, though, from Brussels and all the people I spoke to yesterday, it wasn't necessarily defence of wind power in Europe that came through. It was defence of climate agreement targets, climate goals still, and being committed to net zero. So there was an agreement, look, we're in similar territory with the United States on nuclear. But they did not say that on wind. They're looking at new sources, whether it's hydrogen coming into Europe. Are you concerned that wind is just on the outer because of the optics from the US president and what he's described around the wind industry?
No, because what we can also see, and we track, you track Vestas well enough, and the wind industry in Europe well enough, and across the world, it is not about stopping. It's actually about expanding capacity, because we need more of all of it. And I think here it doesn't change the underlying fundamentals that we need more of many things. Climate is just not that priority. So when we sat down here in 21 and 22, I think the world got disconnected a bit, which again, pendulum swang too far out here. And now we are back to sort of saying, with the technology, you had Christian in here on AI, with the technology that is being here, we need to have societies with us, because otherwise the affordability becomes a problem for the consumer on a daily basis.
Henrik, United States, huge legal battle over Revolution Wind, which is off Connecticut and Rhode Island, I believe, as well. You are a component supplier for Ørsted there, aren't you?
No, I'm a component supplier in an Empire Wind in
Empire
New York.
Wind. Okay. What does the future of the USA look like for the rest of this presidency? Is it just going to be a battle after battle in the courts, or is it just not worth the while?
Well, as I said, so far it's probably 5 projects that are a bit better discussed off a live interview in Davos, because it is surrounded by a number of discussion constantly. The truth of it is, the underlying is that the states that are the off-takers, and therefore the ones that actually need the electricity, are pretty keen to have this finished, completed, and have the electricity.
Can states move ahead even if the federal government is against more wind farms?
I will say here, if I was sitting at an offshore in the US, I wouldn't build and start new projects, because, hey, come on, it raises the fundamental question: when you build something, whether you use a technology of either or, the ones that are using the technology should also like the technology, because otherwise you're building an asset, 30, 50 years lifetime, that in reality you need the underlying product, which is electricity and energy in this. Therefore, you also got to subscribe to it. And if you constant battle it, then we are out of something principle that is rule-based around investments, and that's not beneficial for any of us.
Henrik, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. Henrik Andersen with us, the CEO of Vestas.